On this planet, you will die. We have seen it.
Hello and welcome. We're going to be answering the question, can you solo Dune Awakening? For those of you that don't want to waste time, the simple answer is yes, but we're going to go into a lot of information. How does PvP work? How do the servers work? What server to join? How does the political Landsraad system work? What we need to do as a solo player, trying to run around the crazy world of Dune. All the information I've gathered is in the public domain, spread across about 10 hours of watching videos on Dune, research, you name it. A lot of time and effort is going into this, but it will provide you with the most accurate data and information we have about how it's all going to work. So there's going to be a lot here. You're going to get a great understanding of the endgame, how the endgame loop works, and by far the most important thing we're going to answer is, can you solo Dune Awakening, given that it's a MMO PvP hybrid? Let's get into it. In Dune Awakening, your journey begins not with a character creator, but with choosing a server. The server acts as your persistent world, the one thing you can hold on to that will remain the same. This will be where your character will develop and interact with up to 40 other players on that single server. More like a server instant, as how it will work is you'll have, similar to many other games, you'll have sort of a global server name. Let's just call it Dune Awakening. You'd click on that, and then under Dune Awakening, you'll have many instances of a server where you would click and actually join that to create a character and start your Dune Awakening experience. So each server will contain multiple Hagga Basins. And Hagga Basin, think of it as your base of operation, which acts as the zone for your skill progression, intel gathering, base building, farming, resource gathering, predominantly PvE, with some little sprinkles of PvP points of interest. Basically, this is the place where you gather your experience in Dune Awakening in a much more relaxed, mostly PvE format. But don't kid yourself, it's still Arrakis. It is filled with treachery and death that comes with its own sets of challenges. Surviving alone is going to be tricky. It's important to note though, just like Rust or any other survival game, you want to make sure you're on the same server or the Hagga Basin instant if you're playing with mates. So all join the same server. Technically, we'll get into this a bit more. You could actually join different Hagga Basin instances within the Dune Awakening server and still meet up in the PvP area. But it's imperative that you all join the same, what I'm calling Dune Awakening Server Stack 1 within this example. So as long as you're in Dune Awakening Server Stack 1 and you go into any of the different Hagga Basins, you could potentially meet your mates later in the social areas. However, if you want to experience all the good stuff, you want to join the same Hagga Basin instance, but we'll come to that in more detail soon. It's important to understand that these Hagga Basin instances is considered the PvE zone. This is where a bulk of your playtime will be, and particularly if you're a solo player, this is where you may have the most fun. As we know that the PvP all the way on the other side is where we will find the absolute best gear, best things in the game. So from what we know there is content that we won't be able to access unless we venture into the PvP zone. And that's why it's so important to answer this question, can we solo Dune Awakening? So now we've picked our server. Before stepping on to Arrakis, players will undergo an extensive character creator that begins off-world, aboard a Highliner, those massive ships, all in the presence of the Reverend Mother. Here we'll customize our appearances. You'll select a home world. You'll choose a caste. These two options affect your social interactions. So dialogue are influenced by these choices. Then you'll pick a mentor, either a Mentat, Swordmaster, a Bene Gesserit, and a Trooper. This choice grants initial skills and ability. But do note you will gain access to all classes, skills, and abilities. So you'll basically be able to create your very own class. From there, we crash land on Arrakis. We wake up alone in a cave. Here we learn basically the tutorial stuff, harvesting water, crafting weapons, and dealing with sunstroke. You go through all this before stepping onto the harsh desert completely naked with nothing but undies, the gold standard of any survival game. And this is where we will be joining our Hagga Basin. So we've escaped the starting area. You'll find yourself in Hagga Basin, a PvE zone. At this point, this is where you'll be able to meet up with mates and start your journey of Dune Awakening together. The Hagga Basin map size is reported to be roughly the same as Conan Exile's map, which is about 40 kilometers squared. Just to give you some frame of reference, the Skyrim map is about 37 kilometers. We don't know if it's going to be bigger or not, but it's been mentioned that it's around the same size. So that just gives you an idea of the sheer scale of it. So it's quite a big, huge map. For 40 players, it's going to be a lot of space. Now, from everything we know, Hagga Basin, the PvE area, can be done completely solo. But for the solo players, the main objective is going to be getting mobile. Here we'll get our first sandbike within the starting area and venture out into the greater Hagga Basin, all the way until we progress up to getting an ornithopter, where the game changes significantly. And from everything we can gather, Hagga Basin can be completely and entirely done being solo. You still get the choices of creating your own guild and being a solo guild, or not joining a guild at all. Completing the main story, quests, missions, and all the content within Hagga Basin, from my understanding, can be completely done by yourself as a solo player, no dramas. But now that we've got our ornithopter and we've learned the basics and we understand all the game mechanics fairly well, here we get to have the freedom to venture in to the deep, dark, deep desert. But before we jump into the deep desert, which is the PvP area, with a slither of PvE, so you can set up a base still and not get ganked every 2 seconds as soon as you step in there. It's really important we understand the reset system, and this is done by the Coriolis Storm, a dynamic map reset. One of the most unique aspects of the deep desert is the weekly Coriolis Storm, which serves as a world resetting event with major gameplay implications. We won't go too much into this as we've explained it quite exhaustively in a previous video, but just to touch on it, how will the Coriolis Storm work? So a massive desert storm once every week sweeps across the deep desert and even Hagga Basin. However, it only wipes out everything in the deep desert zone. So any structures, temporary buildings, or player-made defenses in the deep desert are completely destroyed by the storm. It's going to alter the landscape. Each storm shifts the terrain, meaning that dungeons, resource locations, points of interest are all repositioned, changed, making exploration a consistent challenge where the map never stays the same. So basically, they've implemented a weather system that is going to wipe the deep desert once a week. And all this will make a lot more sense as to why as we go through the video. But it's just important you understand that. So the deep desert gets wiped once a week. Your PvE area is behind the shield wall. It will still receive the storm, but it's not going to delete or remove anything that you've built or created. We need to explain how it all works, how it all comes together, because it's probably one of the more unique aspects to Dune Awakening. It might be the first or one of the first ways they're setting up the technology in the back end for a survival game. So let's dive into it, as it's pretty freaking interesting. So Dune Awakening uses a server meshing system. You've heard of this technology used in games like Star Citizen, where you could be seamlessly traveling within the world and actually be changing servers as you do. And those servers will represent regions, so sections of a map. And with this design, they can create a seamless open world experience while allowing thousands of players to interact across different zones. So instead of having one massive server, the game splits the world into multiple connected servers, each handling different regions. So as mentioned, we choose our persistent world, the Hagga Basin instance. You can think of this as like a separate server. However, it's still interconnected, as it's still linking us to a larger world. And that's where we come to the overworld map. This is the connection hub for travel. The overworld map acts as a travel hub, allowing players to move between different regions, social hubs, and the deep desert. So once we've crafted our ornithopter, you can fly across the overworld map. We know we have Arakeen and Harko village, both of these representing the 2 different major factions, Harkonnen and Atreides. So we'll be able to use this map to travel to these social hubs where everyone on our main overarching server can be found. So it's within these social hubs, which expands to the deep desert, that interconnects everyone that's on the same major server. So for instance, in that example previously, we had the Dune Awakening server. Within that, clicking on that would then result in a drop down of, maybe 20, 40, we don't even know how many instances, but like say, 100 other Hagga Basins. And so all those places under that bracket will be competing and meshing with each other in these social hubs. And we use the overworld map to travel between these locations. Traveling on the overworld map will consume water and fuel. So to simply put, the overworld map connects multiple servers, ensuring players can interact beyond their starting instance. And this is why you and your mates, if you're not solo, could join different Hagga Basin instances or worlds within the example of Dune Awakening server. And because all your servers are meshed together, you'll be able to meet and catch up in the social areas and PvP area. And this is how the deep desert, the massive open world PvP region, can support up to 1,000 players. It's been reported. We're not sure if that's 100% accurate, but we're looking at about 1,000 players, which is pretty insane. Can't even imagine the scales of battle that would equate to. But But the way the Deep Desert works is there'll be 9 interconnected servers, basically one server representing each region. So as you travel through the Deep Desert, you'll be going into different regions and actually changing server behind the background. And you won't even notice it. So it's unlike Hagga Basin, the Deep Desert is not instanced. So the server meshing allows multiple servers to function as a single continuous world by dynamically shifting players' load. When you move from one zone to another, the game will seamlessly transition you to a new server without disconnecting. If too many people gather in one area, the system balances the load by dynamically distributing them across different server nodes. This ensures that large-scale battles, e.g. 100 players in the Deep Desert, run smoothly without overwhelming a single server. Why this system is important to a survival game? It creates a massive world. The Deep Desert scales up to 1,000 players, making it feel like a true MMO battle. This will ensure smooth performance. Instead of an overloaded server, the game will distribute load dynamically. It allows seamless exploration, players can move freely. So that gives you a good indication of sort of how under the hood it's all going to work. And it's important to understand this as a solo player because it highlights one thing we can rely on as a solo player, and that is the size and structure of the Deep Desert is freaking massive. Is approximately 576 square kilometers. So we're talking about an area bigger than New York City in the game world. And this is going to be our safety and reprieve as a solo player. As one of the most important functions that is going to allow solo players to exist within Dune Awakening is the fact that there is a completely PvE zone within the Deep Desert where you can actually go set up a base without having to worry about getting attacked or killed by other players. This one aspect alone is going to make it possible for solo players to be able to participate into the endgame activities as a solo player. However, you're going to have all the guile and cunning, I imagine, to preserve yourself out there. There is still many mechanisms within the game for you to be able to operate outside the PvP zone, whether it be through trade, possibly selling spice, selling map data. You could potentially be an expert builder, build the craziest buildings and sell those schematics. You could collect some of the rarest schematics within the Basin and flip those. So solo players can still even participate in the Landsraad, the whole political system within Dune Awakening, but your role will be quite different compared to a large guild and the organized factions. The Landsraad will be a server-wide faction war system where we will go through a process where we opt in to either go with House Atreides or House Harkonnen. And there might even be a third faction. There's been some hints of another faction. We don't know what it might be just yet. But the two major factions compete in the Landsraad in weekly strategic battles to gain control over Arrakis. However, as a solo player, your influence in the Landsraad will depend on your contribution to your chosen faction, rather than controlling decisions directly. So how does the Landsraad system work within Dune Awakening? The Landsraad is a core endgame political system within Dune Awakening, where guilds and factions compete for control over the server-wide rules each week. It serves as a faction-driven competition that determines which house, Atreides or Harkonnen, exerts influence over the servers by securing votes. This system creates a dynamic, evolving gameplay experience where players' actions shape the world each week, ensuring new strategic shift in alliances and political intrigue. How does it actually work? The Landsraad is a weekly event where guilds align with either Atreides or Harkonnen, complete tasks to earn votes. The factions with the most votes at the end of the week gain the rights to set a global rule that applies to all players on the server. The third faction, which we don't know what it will be just yet, which is planned for post-launch, an update hopefully, an expansion pack, I don't know, is planned and to act as a balancing force to ensure neither House Atreides or Harkonnen permanently dominate the server. But we don't know much about that, so we can't really go into detail. How would you earn votes in the Landsraad? Votes are earned by completing faction-based objectives, including, but not limited to, controlling specific territories. We do have confirmation that capturing key locations within the Deep Desert is one of the ways you can earn votes. They'll be delivering resources, large quantity of spice, rare materials, and crafted goods, mapping and exploration, providing valuable intel on shifting sands, dungeons, and key locations, PvP and faction warfare, engaging in skirmishes over control points in contested zones, economic contribution, trading, crafting, and supporting faction logistics. This is sort of what I've gathered from different sources, so this is not going to be 100% correct, but this is basically what we understand it to be right now from the public domain. Factions must prioritize objectives strategically, since votes are counted weekly, and completing key tasks before the opposing faction can block their progress. The Landsraad operates as a bingo board system, meaning factions must complete 5 tasks in a row horizontally, vertically, or diagonally to win for the week. So an example of a weekly bingo board layout might be Task 1, PvP fight. Task 2, craft X amount of items. Task 3, deliver spice. Task 4, control this region. Task 5, map area. If House Atreides completes 5 tasks in a row before Harkonnen, they win control of the server rule for that next week. If Harkonnen is leading, Atreides must disrupt their progression by completing one of the key tasks first, basically blocking them on the bingo board. This system ensures that each week presents fresh challenges, preventing any faction from easily dominating the game. What happens when one of the factions wins? The winning faction chooses a server-wide rule that remains active for that entire week. These rules significantly impact gameplay that create new dynamics that all players must adapt to. Just an example of a possible server-wide rule, there might be an economic buff, 25% reduction in crafting costs for the winning faction. Or there might be something like a resource modification that increases the faction's reward when mining or harvesting. These are just some rough examples. We don't really know what they are yet, but I expect them to be much more glorious and various than this. So when it comes to a solo player, can they participate in the Landsraad? Well, a solo player can create their own guild and technically still participate in all the Landsraad activities. As a solo player, you contribute by completing individual tasks that count towards the faction's overall progress. These objectives may include something like crafting a specific item for your faction, trading resources or funding war efforts through the marketplace, completing faction quests given by NPCs in the social hubs like Arakeen and Harko Village, scouting enemy movements, or gathering intelligence on rival factions. But you could, if you like, offer your services as a mercenary and help in some of the battles. Join a guild temporarily to help sway the Landsraad. But the Landsraad is going to be a huge emphasis, as ultimately we're competing over the control of the Landsraad, and we do that through all the things mentioned, but particularly in the deep desert, controlling certain points. But since every player's contribution adds up, even small efforts from solo players could help push the faction towards victory. But all of this may not be 100% accurate, so keep that in mind. But without a doubt, being solo, you will be contributing less to the overall battle of the factions. However, you could think of other ways to support gathering and selling rare materials that PvP-focused players need, crafting and trading weapons, armor, and vehicles to fuel the war effort. You could be a middleman. You could be selling deep desert loot on the marketplace, operating as a medium between multiple different factions. The possibilities are really going to be where the imagination stops, but from a pure technical point of view, but your influence will be much smaller compared to large guild. You can trade and craft to support the war effort. And all of this brings us to more of a guesstimation. Now we have to think of the PvP servers like Rust. We've all seen on Rust how insanely difficult it can be to be a solo player on a heavily guilded up server. However, what I think will be critical to the lone wolf is going to be trying to pick servers that have low population. Going in, perhaps at odd times, is going to be one very viable strategy. However, being a solo player on a very populated deep desert is going to require a lot of luck, skill, and a ton of ingenuity. However, solo players might find a pocket to exist in, whether selling a various multitude of different things, becoming a mercenary, becoming a spy. You could offer your services so many ways to also access the same gear. You'll be able to do a lot of trading, so technically there should be a good way to be able to earn and do everything in PvE zone, sell or trade your way to get all the best gear. But I can imagine the PvP zone being exactly like Rust, being brutal, unforgiving. But the only thing that's going to set this apart is that you have the sanctuary of the PvE zone, whereas guilds might be building their base anywhere on the map, as well as the PvE zone. So you'll be able to place your base in the safe zone and be very strategical about how you venture out and complete all the various activities as stealth using guile and cunning. I believe it's going to be very possible, but I also believe it's going to come at great difficulty and challenge, just like other games like this we know about. Survival games are brutal. Being a lone wolf on a heavy gilded up server is going to be something of a making of a good video. We'll most definitely try to set this scenario up ourselves and give it a good test. But with that, we have a very good understanding of where we're going to sort of sit. We're going to be able to participate in the Landsraad to the factions, but be quite handicapped in the PvP zones. But the good thing is it's still very open. We don't know. The map is so bloody big. There's a chance you could completely survive without even running into anyone. But with all that said, 100% you'll be able to be a solo player within Dune Awakening, without a doubt. It's just going to come with extra challenges, but it's all going to be available and accessible. And it seems like they've tried to think about the solo as well as the big guilds, but it feels like everyone's going to find their place and it's going to be one freaking wild ride. But let me know what you think. Do you think we're going to be able to go in solo into the deep desert in a heavily gilded up server? What are your thoughts on the current implementation of what we understand? Is it a good system? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is going to be awesome. It's a wild ride to come. Thanks for watching. Peace.